Welcome to the Blade Lab. I'm going to be doing a review of the Robjohnsons Cedar today. Very cool, sort of custom-ish mid-tech knife made by, oddly enough, somebody named Nicholas and not actually Robjohnsons. He is located in Latvia in northeastern Europe. And let's get into it. So, first of all, you hear a lot of people refer to this as, or the maker as, Robjohnson. So, as I said, that's not true. Rob and Johnson are actually the names, or Rob and John, I think, were actually the names of his great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather who were in the blacksmith trade. So he's named the company after them in their honor. And so let's check this out. All these knives come with this very cool box. I think this is made out of cedar, which would be appropriate to the knife name. Smell it. Yep, definitely smells like cedar. And what's also cool is, like, when you open this up, this is obviously how the knife comes, but the relevant information, the COA, is on the sort of burned into the lid of the box. Let's see if we can get it to focus on that. So yeah, this one, this particular one that I have is in RWL34 steel. And you can read the rest of it there. We'll get into the specifics later. So, and this is, obviously he's got his website, and why isn't this focusing today? My camera sucks. Yeah, and it's got signature there, Nicholas's signature. So that's a better view of it. All right, so let's just put that aside. So this was, per usual, purchased by me with my own funds. And when you go to his website, you'll see that he has a couple different models. This first one, I think it was the Cypress. I could be wrong about that, but you can check. And his second model, this one, is the Cedar. And I ordered basically the sort of plain Jane version, almost the most plain Jane version that he has. I have obviously the diamond textured handle. He also has one that's just a plain handle, so that would be the one sort of less fancy thing you could do. But he also has a radial pattern milling that you can get, which is also very cool. He has different steels. I think you can get this in Vanax for extra cost. He has all kinds of different anodization options that you can choose. You can have the scales anodized, hardware, in different colors, different blade finishes. The handle that I have here, I believe, is the raw finish. He also has stonewashed and maybe something else. So yeah, this is something that I bought because I've seen some really cool reviews of it, and because it is a good size for me, and I just thought it was a great looking knife. And price wise, it is not inexpensive, but it's also not sort of at the level of many US made mid-techs. So it's going to come in the, I think it's $600 to $700 range. So again, not cheap, but also affordable for what it is, which is, basically one person in a CNC machine making knives to order. So you can see here, let me see, the pivot has these sort of trees, which is the Robjohnsons logo. Pretty cool. Obviously, it's a captive pivot. The blade itself is sort of CNC. It's a milled blade. It's not hand ground. I think it looks great. We'll talk about that a little more later. So I really love the sort of stepped look that you get on this. As I said, there are different finishes, and I can't remember exactly what this one was called, but anyway, I quite like it. The milling itself, you can certainly feel it, but it's not so sharp that it's going to provide a lot of resistance for cutting. Construction-wise, it's quite simple. You have basically, you can take this knife down with 2 screws. You got the pivot screw, and you have this screw here, both of which are T8s. This one goes through the titanium backspacer. The scales are, of course, titanium, 6AL 4V titanium, which is a very good grade. The pocket clip is milled and has the same milling pattern as the scales, which is cool. He did a really nice job sort of cutting it out around the lock bar cutout, so it consequently it goes in and out of pocket really easily. It doesn't, your pants are not going to jam up in there, so that's a nice feature. I also kind of like the way this the lock bar is sort of curved around there. It's kind of a cool look. When closed, you can see the tolerances are pretty good here. You know, it's not sort of a hairline cut out, but it's not overly wide either, as you'll see in some knives. All right. Some of the other specs that are on his website. You'll see that the lock bar, it does have a lock bar insert and over travel stop. I think I have a photo I'll throw up around this point showing the disassembled knife. But kind of a nice touch, the lock bar insert is actually made out of 14C28N steel, which he says is hardened to 58 HRC, which, you know, a lot of budget knives actually have the blades made out of something just like that. So it's a good material for a lock bar insert. It's got good toughness and corrosion resistance. If you get the Van Axe blade, then you're going to have a very sort of corrosion resistant knife in general, between the stainless hardware lock bar insert and the virtually rust proof Van Axe. Got a little spot on there, but I think it is just some schmutz I'll have to get off later. So yeah, getting back to what attracted me to the knife, I always look at, you know, sort of 4 factors. Is it aesthetics? Is it materials? Is it mechanism? Is it the action? In this case, it's kind of all of those things. You know, aesthetically, you know, obviously that's an individual choice, but I think it's a great looking knife. You know, just the design is very clean without, you know, it's sort of minimalist without being kind of boring like some minimalist knives can be. Materials are top notch, as discussed. The mechanism, obviously, it's a frame lock, and I like frame locks because it's a time-tested locking mechanism, and it provides generally good action because it has a real detent ball. And I'm going to get into the action in a little bit because that's kind of a special thing with this knife. Before we do that, let's just get into kind of more of the specs and just the objective look at it. So let me open this up. Let's just start off by doing a couple size comparisons. Start off with my usual suspects. So the first is going to be the Spyderco PM2. So you can see that this is a full-size knife, or maybe, you know, maybe sort of on the little on the plus size of full size, because I consider the PM2 to be full size. And we do them sort of butt to butt. You can see the Cedar is actually bigger than the PM2, and it has way more blade length, way more. The other sort of standard comparison I use is the Benchmade Bug Out. This is sort of in the fancy carbon fiber S90V version. The Bug Out is much smaller, clearly. So let's compare it to a couple other knives that are sort of in a similar price category and are somewhat similar. So this is going to be your Chris Reeve Sebenza 31 large, and the recently reviewed Tactile Knife Co. Archer. And so you'll see the Cedar is about the same size as the Sebenza 31, and it's a little bit bigger, just a little bit bigger than the Tactile Archer. So there is your size comparisons. In terms of specifics, the overall length of the knife is 8.3 inches. The blade length is 3.6 inches, and the cutting edge is actually a little bit over 3.6 inches. So be aware, depending on the laws in your jurisdiction. The weight is a very reasonable 4.2 ounces, so not quite an ounce an inch, but pretty close. The blade stock thickness is 0.125 inches, which is probably just about average, or on the maybe slightly on the thin side of average for EDC knives. From factory, the knife was sharpened at 20 degrees per side, and it was at 9 thousandths of an inch behind the edge at 20 degrees. I have since sharpened it to, I think it's about 16 degrees per side now, and even at 16 degrees per side, it's still only about 10,000 degrees per inch. So that's fantastic, very slicey. And you know, the nice thing about that, having just a super tall grind that also comes down very thin behind the edge, is that you can sharpen it multiple times without this edge bevel becoming too thick. And it also just cuts better when a knife is thin behind the edge. That is, speaking of sharpening though, that's something we do need to talk about, and that is this sharpening choil, or kind of lack thereof. That is definitely a demerit for me. I did my best not to create a spile here. It was not easy, and the more you sharpen it, sort of the more difficult that's going to become. On the plus side, you can, if necessary, you can widen out this sharpening choil because it has internal stop pins. So there's nothing you're going to screw up, nothing you're going to screw up, assuming you do it carefully, in terms of the closing safety. If you widen out that sharpening choil somewhat. But if I was going to make suggestions to Mr. Nicholas, I would suggest please give us a bigger sharpening choil there going forward. All right. As I said, it is this is RWL 34 steel, which is a good it's a knife you see a lot in custom knives, and I think the reason for that, it's the same thing as CPM 154. Did I literally just say that? I can't remember. Sorry, but yeah, it's a very common knife, that and RWL 34 in custom knives, and I think the reason for that is because it's a decent balance steel. It has pretty good edge retention. It's pretty good in corrosion resistance, and it has pretty good toughness. It's not great in any one thing, but it's generally a good steel. And I think the impression I get is that it's pretty easy to grind and finish, and that's why you see a lot of custom makers using it. And probably also not as expensive as some of your more super steely steels. All right, I'm trying to remember exactly what I tested the hardness of this blade at. I think he advertises it at, I think he says 62 to 63 HRC, or maybe it's 62 to 64. In any case, hold on, let me just pause this for a minute and check, because that is something that impressed me. And unfortunately now I have to wake up my computer to check my list. So while that is happening, I'll get back to the factory edge, which I said was 20 degrees per side, which is fine. It wasn't particularly a great factory edge in terms of sharpness. I got a score of 225 best, and that is pretty much average. It's just slightly higher than average for factory edges. So if you care about such things, then the factory edge is just okay. Okay, so now I'm just checking here my list of hardness tests. Yeah. So yeah, I tested this particular blade at 64.1 HRC, which is an excellent number for RWL34. So because of that hardness, it's going to take a low edge angle better. It's going to have better edge retention than the typical RWL34 CPM 154 that you will get in a production knife. So I was really happy about that. I saw on his Instagram that he was showing some tests where I think he got some blades up to as high as like 65 maybe. So yeah, this was actually harder than advertised. So that's excellent. I was really happy to find out about that. In terms of the blade shape, it's a very practical shape. It's I guess you would call this a drop point, and so you have a lot of straight section for cutting. If you're cutting cardboard, or you're cutting, sort of cutting rope by sort of pulling the knife through it, but it also has a decent amount of belly for cutting on a surface. If you're sort of cutting that way, so it's very good for that. And the blade tip, while it is not what I would call a low tip, it's also a reasonably low. I would call it a reasonably low tip. So it's going to come to about just above probably the height of the pivot. So if you do need to sort of do some detail cutting, you don't have to zoom out a little bit here. So yeah, you can easily get to the tip without having to jack up your wrist too high. So a very practical blade shape, in my opinion. I did mention that the pocket clip works very well. If you look at the depth of it is, I would say, pretty good. I have a lot of shorts and pants that have thick pockets, and this goes in and out of pocket very easily. So that's excellent. You don't always find that with these milled clips. I think it also complements the aesthetics of the knife very well, which is also something that unfortunately more knife makers don't really take into consideration. Example. And I have an aftermarket clip on this one, but because you get a Spyderco 19 times out of 20, you're just going to get whatever stamped Spyderco clip you get. So it's nice when somebody actually puts some thought into matching the design of the clip to the design of the scales and the knife overall. So excellent there. As far as the carry goes, it is, I would call it, a relatively shallow carry. You're going to have about this much sticking out of your pocket, and I think that is absolutely fine. Gives you a little bit something to grab onto, and not much is going to be poking out of your pocket. So finally, let's talk about what I think is probably the most special thing about this knife, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit again. So the most special thing about this knife, in my opinion, is going to be the action. And it's hard to convey because you can't feel it, but it almost feels assisted. When you do the reverse flick on this knife, it's like, it comes out and it feels like it's coming out harder than it should based upon how much sort of input you put into it. But obviously it is not assisted, but it really does almost feel that way. And that is just a pretty rare quality. So that is the reverse flick. Fantastic, you know, one of the best reverse flicks of any knife I have, and I've got some pretty darn good ones, I think. You can also thumb flick this knife pretty easily. It's not as good as the reverse flick. I always think that a stud works better than a hole for thumb flicking, but it works perfectly well. as I shit can it. But it works perfectly well. It also has a rear flipper. Mixed feelings about the rear flipper. You see, it does have jimping on there, but sort of like the Archer I recently reviewed, this jimping really doesn't provide much traction. It's pretty darn shallow, not sharp at all. It's a small flipper, and it works perfectly well. You want to make sure you're not on the lock bar when you do this, but it will rocket out when you hit it. The problem is, if you are on the lock bar a little bit, or you don't, really wind up, you can easily sort of come off of it, and then it kind of hurts your finger. But so when you do it, you really got to commit to it, And if you do, it will launch out of there like a freaking missile. You see, I just missed one. So I do use that a lot because I'm a fidgeting fool. But the best and most frequent deployment method I use is the reverse flicker. And if you're a reverse flick guy, you're gonna love this knife. If you're a guy who just likes to use rear flipper, might not be for you. So yeah, that's going to be my take on the action. So between the action and the, I think, really beautiful aesthetics, I would give this knife a highly recommended. Now let me get to my one real nitpick with this knife. Actually, I have a couple, but the one major sort of nitpick I have with this knife is the finishing and the sort of fitment of this of the lock bar insert, or the scale, where the scale meets the lock bar insert. There is a real sharp corner here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show it. Just keep rotating it. Maybe that's the best angle. That is a real sort of point here, and you can absolutely feel it a lot when I'm just fiddling around with the knife. So that's something that should not come out of the factory, honestly, or not factory, workshop in this case. I would be tempted to send the knife back to have that fixed, but that's not kind of the sort of dude I am. So what I will certainly end up doing, maybe I'll do a short video on it, but I will definitely take this apart and take out the lock bar, and I'm just going to take, all it would take really is just a little sort of, maybe a 600 grit sandpaper, and just sort of knock down that sharp point there, and I think that will take care of it pretty easily. So, but yeah, that's when you're paying this sort of money, you kind of want to get something that doesn't have, something that kind of catches you and could, honestly, my fingers are pretty coarse, just from doing so much, fiddling and sharpening. I think I have like diamonds and chromium oxide embedded in my skin. But if you had sort of soft skin, this could probably cut you, this thing, because it really is sharp. So that is my biggest nitpick for sure. Another nitpick is, let's see if we can get it here. The milling of the blade, I don't know if you can see, it's got a few prints on it now. But there's some like waviness to it, particularly on the show side. It's really hard to show under the camera. Can you see, like right up here? There's just a few irregularities in the milling there. I think we sort of caught it. And just down here is a little bit of waviness. I know this is very picky, but it's not. It doesn't show up on the lock bar side of the knife. So I don't know what's going on there, but I wish it was this way on both sides. Wonder if maybe just it was time to change the the sort of bit in his mill and went a little bit too far on the show side. So that's another pretty minor nitpick. Most people are not even going to notice that, I'm sure. Overall, though, yeah, I highly recommend the knife. I think it's a good value for a basically custom order, small batch knife. And I think it's beautiful, and the action is amazing, and it's an excellent cutter. So despite the few nitpicks, I say if you're in the market for something in this category, absolutely go for it. I would recommend it. In conclusion, that's my conclusion. And thank you for coming by the Blade Lab. And if you enjoyed the video, and if you please hit the thumbs up, the like button. Apparently this would be beneficial to my YouTube channel. And if you like this kind of content, and I also do a lot of sort of sharpening and sharpening system content, please subscribe, and there will be more coming at you. And until then, y'all have a good day. Bye now.